Okay, everybody, here we go. We are officially live. Good morning. Happy Monday. Hope that you all had a fabulous weekend. We are here for the Astro-Babble. We are here to focus on astrology and the charts of 5 of you who have donated your birth dates, place, and times to the queue. Just as a reminder for those of you who are following these live streams, if you would like to add your list or somebody in your friends or family circle, a spouse, anybody who has given you consent, always consent. This is kind of putting the chart on blast, so we want to make sure we get permission. Feel free to send via private message birth dates, birth places, birth times, and I will add those charts to the list, and we will kind of get all these people read for the world to see. Also, if you would like to work privately, kind of one-on-one, unpack your chart, maybe learn some astrology, you can always go to my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com, where I have all of my online classes, as well as my consultation request form and all that jazz. So, enough about me. Let's talk about the charts. We've got 5 really fun ones today. I say really fun, but I don't know. I just kind of plug them into my software, and we're reading them cold. So that's kind of a misnomer. I'm not sure if they're going to be actually fun or not. We'll see. But regardless, we're starting with Sarah. Cheers. Good morning, Sarah. How are you? Okay. Leo ascendant, Pisces in the 8th, super psychic. Moon in Virgo, North Node Virgo, Saturn Virgo. That's some pretty heavy financial influence in the chart. And that Jupiter right on the edge. Okay. So, Sarah, let's talk a little bit about you. So I know that you've always identified as a Pisces, and sometimes to your detriment. You know, Pisces, having a Pisces sun in the 8th is definitely a very traumatic space for Pisces to have their sun. The 8th house is the house of death. It does bring forward, especially when paired with the intuitive side of Pisces, a lot of kind of in-your-face psychic skills. You know, Pisces is the sign that is naturally prone to boundary issues and has a strong intuition on an average day. But when we put the sun in the 8th house of death, that does bring that kind of death touch to the spirit, and it connects you with the other side in a way that is pretty potent. So if you're not already embracing that, if you're not already working with that, that could be where a lot of your restlessness and anxiety is coming from, is literally the spiritual partnerships that you're neglecting or not necessarily fully invested in. So invest is a good word for your chart, because we're going to talk a lot about finances too. But even though you identify very heavily as a Pisces, we do have this Leo side of the chart that we need to kind of talk about. So because you have Leo on the ascendant, this is where you get your gregariousness. This is where you get your spunky personality. This is where you get your need to be the center of attention. This is where you get your eye for talent, right? And your ability to know who to invest in and why. So that's kind of something to be aware of. What I do find fascinating about your chart is you've decided to put your sun as the ruler of your chart in the 8th, and your moon opposing it, a full moon in Virgo in the 2nd. The 8th and the 2nd are both finance and business related. When we look at the 8th house as a house of business, taxes, estates, but also other people's money, it's very much an investment house. It's very much the wealth that other people accrue. Yeah. Whereas the 2nd house is the house of personal wealth, personal finance, what you own, right? And to have a full moon and the moon, you know, opposing the sun because of that fullness between these two houses, I think one of the things that you're really here to master is the idea of what other people are worth, and the worth of other people, and the idea of investing, and the idea of kind of accruing riches over time, and those things that are given to you throughout the bloodlines, throughout the generations, passed down from kind of generation to generation through the estate. But then also what you do with those resources when you get them. and how you transform those investments into actual personal cash and value. And especially when you feel disconnected from those legacies, those financial resources that others may kind of lord over you, does that actually impact your feeling of personal value and wealth? Yeah. Putting the moon in your second house of wealth is an interesting choice because it attaches your emotions to your bank accounts, to your financial state. And that can be somewhat problematic, I'm not gonna lie. Moon in Virgo is great for mastering money. It just has this intuitive knowledge of what wealth is. But putting that moon in Virgo in the second house also ties your heart to that number that's on your checking and your savings. So if your bank account dips, so too will your emotions dip. And making that correlation is going to be really important for your overall emotional intelligence. Because when you feel elated, it's probably because you feel financially secure. When you feel down and out, it's probably because you don't feel financially secure. And that's the blessing and the curse of the second house. You do have Saturn in Virgo retrograde here, which is a very heavy placement. And I like that. It's a very conservative placement financially. And when we see the moon, which is a little bit more emotional, I like Saturn in Virgo here. I like that counterbalance. I like that ritualistic, saving-oriented, investment-oriented energy of Saturn in Virgo retrograde, that caution that Saturn would bring in the second house to counterbalance the emotional spending that might be inflicted by the moon. We also have the North Node here, so you mastering personal finance is going to be an overall goal of the life, and really making sure that you understand, one, that your personal wealth is not dictated by your riches. Yeah. But then your riches also do have a lot to say about how you value your time, your energy, your intention, your place in the world. A lot of people in the spiritual communities, they get very confused about money. And sometimes I hear people throw around, well, you can't have money and be spiritual at the same time. And I totally disagree with that. People who are spiritual living in poverty as an excuse of their spirituality, no, not gonna jump on that bandwagon. And I think you learning how to balance your personal sense of wealth with your financial wealth will be a large goal, and embracing both sides of that coin. Cool. Wouldn't surprise me if you actually worked in the financial field, because Saturn is ruling your sixth house of work from your second house of finance. You'd be a great banker. You'd be great helping other people with their money as well, especially with Sun in Pisces. You'd be a great financial advisor, somebody who helps other people kind of understand their own resources because of that Sun in Pisces, as well as that intuitive element, just being a little bit more kind of intuitive with that. Let's see. That Saturn is also doing some pretty funky things with your seventh house. It does mean that when we look at Saturn from the second ruling the seventh of finance, that your intimate relationships will also be very financially focused. And there will be a lot of discussion about money in your relationships. One of the things that I really enjoy about Susie Orman is Susie Orman Osman. I can't remember her last name to save my life, but Susie, she was big financial guru in the 90s and early 2000s, and she continues to be that. She's a powerhouse. But I remember her saying one time on her little TV program, you should always get financially naked with somebody before you get physically naked with somebody, and I love that. And I think that that's kind of something to keep in mind as you explore the seventh house. With your Venus here, but the Venus is in Aquarius, there's a very strong mental connection between you and who you choose to bring into your life. If you don't honor that mental connection with something that's a little bit more tangible, people can have a lot of ideas. They can have a lot of really interesting thoughts, but if they can't put those thoughts into action, if they can't manifest those thoughts into physical wealth, then that might be a sign that, you're going to need to be doing some of the heavy lifting financially in the relationship, and you need to be okay with that. So as you look at this Venus in Aquarius in your seventh house, understand that you're attracted to that Einstein dynamic of somebody who's very mentally active, very quirky, very much head in the clouds energy. But money will be a big focus of the relationship, and you might need to be the grounding force in that. Da, 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 da. Don't think we should talk about that. Oh, but famous spouse. That's fun. Venus ruling the 10th house of success from the 7th house of relationships. Your spouse will actually get some pretty strong notoriety. Oh, and I like your Mercury and Aries in the 9th. That's where you get your desire to explore, your desire to investigate other cultures, your constant need to always be spiritually growing and developing, which is very important with that Pisces sun in the 8th, with those mediumship abilities, for sure. Yeah, I think that's kind of the basis of the chart. So thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you donating your chart to science. And let's go ahead and we'll move on today. Susie Orman, thank you, Gina. Love you. Okie dokie. So let's go ahead and talk about Jill. Morning, Jill. How you doing? Cheers. So Jill also has a Leo ascendant. This time the moon is in Leo in the 1st house of self. Still making the sun the ruler of the chart. The sun is in Scorpio, so happy early birthday to Jill. Sun is in Scorpio right now, so her birthday's coming up. Ooh, Mars in the 3rd in Libra. Natally opposing Saturn in Aries. That's tricky. That's tricky. Tricky, tricky, tricky. Okay. Okay, I see it. All right. Okay. So here's the dynamic of the chart here, and we're rolling. So when we look at the ascendant in Leo, again, when we have Leo on the ascendant, although your sun is in Scorpio, Jill, so we're going to talk about Scorpio in a bit, but we have to respect and understand that you have both the ascendant and the moon in Leo. So you have a double dose of Leo in your chart, which is why you don't always resonate with the idea of being a Scorpio. Having Leo energy in the chart is fixed fire. It's the hearth energy, it's the sun's energy, that fixed point in the center of the solar system that radiates warmth and light and attention. And it's really quite beautiful. It does tend to make you a little bit over the top and dramatic at its worst. It will make you a little bit of a showboat, but it will give you this lovely kind of radiance and warmth at its best. Your ability to spot talent a mile away, your ability to really steal the show and light up a room, all things that are part of your Leo qualities. However, when we counterbalance that with your Scorpio sun, Scorpio squares Leo for a reason. It makes a frictionless aspect with Leo for a reason. And part of that is because Leo is the radiant sign of the sun, and Scorpio is that deep, dark underworld energy that prefers to be hidden and in the shadows. And so there is personal conflict, especially putting your sun in excuse me. Goodness. Especially putting your sun in Scorpio in the 4th house of home. There is this need for you to recharge in your own space, in your own time, in your own cave, right? So that's kind of something that needs to be respected. You have one side of you, or rather kind of 2/3 of your personal makeup that's really gregarious and very outgoing and very much needs to be seen and worshipped to a certain degree. But then you also have this really important side of you, this egoic side of you, that prefers not to be seen, that wants to retreat at home and curl up under all the blankets and turn down all the lights and unplug all the electronic devices and just kind of chill and not do and not be surrounded by people 24/7, because there is this sensitive side to Scorpio that gets overwhelmed very easily, whereas Leo knows how to turn that attention into fodder for its own uses. Social interaction and being seen fuels a Leo, but it is the bane of a Scorpio. And so that's kind of a conflict between the two signs. Now, one of the other things that you need to understand, Jill, is you growing up, your parental dynamic was actually extremely toxic. And it was toxic because of the secrets that were kept for you. The mental state of one or both parents was probably compromised in some way, shape, or form, because we do have Mercury, the planet of the mind, in Scorpio, the sign of secrets, as well as Neptune in Scorpio here, which normally indicates addictions in the home. So when we look at some of those traps that were laid around the fourth house, I think what we need to understand is you may need to do a little bit of bloodline healing. You may need to work with your ancestors a little bit. You may need to respect and honor the family upbringing that you had, but also really do some deep diving into why it was toxic and uprooting any patterns that may have kind of clung to or worked their way into your own programming, because Scorpio's notoriously deep-seated like that, and it will leave behind a lot of pockets of festering ideas and feelings if not rooted out properly. Also, this is one of the things that I like about your chart with the Leo-Scorpio dynamic, is the Leo side makes sure that you don't turn into a hermit and that you don't succumb to that Scorpio energy where you're literally locking yourself in your house for a month or two, and potentially succumbing to a lot of those deeper, older patterns, and repeating some of those patterns that you grew up with in the family dynamic. Yeah, the Leo kind of saves you from that. Let's see, where do we... And then the next part of your chart that I find super interesting is this dynamic between the third house and the ninth house. So we have Uranus, we have Mars, and we have the South Node, all in Libra, all in the third house. And then we have the North Node and retrograde Saturn in Aries in the ninth. And that's really interesting because Saturn is in Mars's sign, and Mars is in Saturn's exaltation. So there is a little bit of a reception there, linking the two houses, but they're already linked by the North and the South Node. One of the things that you're going to understand, Jill, over time, is that okay, there are a couple things here. The first thing is that wherever you go in the world, you are there. Right? So basically, like, you can't run away from your problems. Sorry about it. You know, the ninth house of travel being in mutual reception with the third house of local communities. It's this conflict between, oh yeah, you might really enjoy a new culture. You might be able to appreciate their food, the way that they think, their rituals, their customs. You might really, really enjoy that newness. Right? But at the end of the day, you're kind of there. And at the end of the day, people are people. And the bitterness and the craziness and the loveliness, you know, it's the same, really, wherever you go. It may not seem that way at first, but eventually you start to figure that out. Same thing with the third and the ninth house being scholastic in nature. You know, the third house is writing, teaching, and communication. The ninth house is kind of higher education. If we want to think of the third house as primary schooling, the ninth house would be college level and above, or secondary schooling. And so there is kind of this conflict, this hesitation, this issue with education, but also this really important need to pursue it. Because as you start to pursue higher levels of education specifically, one of the things that excuse me, starts to make sense is the original schooling, the original teachings that you've made. But until you branch out and experience those higher levels, those more worldly aspects of education, you won't be able to process or properly kind of categorize those lessons, those experiences that might have been very hard or difficult at the beginning. Also, because your North Node is in the ninth, like you're really striving towards ninth house qualities this go around. So you actually becoming the teacher, you actually becoming the learned one, and returning to teach those who would have been you, like you breaking the cycle from an educational perspective, just like you breaking the cycle from a family perspective. Very important overall. There's also a marker in your chart for you having children that are more famous than you, again, breaking that cycle, and you using your lineage or your accrued experience to pull both the next generation into a state of grace, a grace that you did not have when you were growing up. So I think that's really kind of the crux of the chart, is you making sure that you have the strength to overcome, and you also, once you overcome, learning from those lessons and then returning back to the source and really moving forward in a concrete way to help other people make sure that they know that, you know, there are people on their side, there are people that survived, there are people who can say kind of it gets better, and to make sure that the patterns that plagued you do not plague the next generation. But yeah, North Node in the ninth, we're really looking at, you know, continued spiritual development, constantly pursuing higher education, working with international people and or clientele, also teaching internationally. You'd be a very good language arts or foreign exchange student. Yeah, and also spiritual growth as well as a side effect of all of that stuff. I think that's pretty much it. The chart has kind of gone cold from that perspective. So hope that that was super fun for you, Jill. Let's go ahead and good morning, everybody who's tuning in on Facebook and Instagram. I appreciate you. Let's go ahead and we'll move to our third chart of the morning, which is going to be Patty. Patty, good morning. Let's take a peek at Patty's chart. Our second sun in Pisces of the morning. We've got a Gemini ascendant with Jupiter in Gemini. Sun in Virgo. Not sure how I feel about that. Mars in Pisces, Saturn in Pisces. Damn, that's a really weird combo, Patty. It's a really weird combo. All this mutable energy in conflict with the ascendant. That's tricky. That's tricky. Another Venus in Aquarius too. North Node in the 12th. Okay, let's kind of pick this chart apart, shall we? So we have a Gemini ascendant, but we also have Jupiter very close to the ascendant, and this creates a very interesting kind of ballooning effect in the chart. The ascendant in Gemini, although your sun is in Pisces, and we'll get to that, Patty, one of the things that you need to understand about your chart is you have your moon, your sun, and your ascendant, each in some of the mutable signs. Thank you, Donna, real quick for submitting that request. Private message me those details and I'll add you to the list. The list is very long, but we will feature your chart. But I'm not doing the links live. There is a waiting list. Anyway, so Patty, when we look at your chart and we see your sun in Pisces, your ascendant in Gemini, your moon in Virgo, that's a lot of mutable energy, darling. That's a lot of energy that is prone to fits of indecision, that is prone to adaptability for sure, you know, but also the idea that you are a chronic chameleon. Yeah. And that can be, that's probably one of the reasons why I'm having a little bit of difficulty kind of looking at your chart and seeing all this, because, you know, yeah, you have this ascendant in Gemini, which makes you so curious and so intellectual and gives you this really strong charisma, but also this ability to jump from one mental emotional extreme to the other, especially with Jupiter just kind of blowing and inflating up those qualities. You know, you really have quite a dynamic personality, and everybody kind of knows it. Yeah, especially with the Lord of your chart, Mercury, being in Aries in the 11th, like quick to make friends for sure. Um, but here's the issue with this placement, my dear, is we have the Sun actually making a pretty tight square, although it's separating. The Sun is making a pretty tight square to the ascendant, and then the ascendant is then applying to a square with the Moon. Uranus and Pluto are also conjunct in the 4th. Goodness gracious. So we need to examine, and this seems to be the theme of our charts today, is the polarities between houses. First, we talked about the 2nd and 8th in terms of finances. Then we talked about the 3rd and 9th in terms of education and learning. And now we're moving into this 3rd chart, which has the 4th house and the 10th house kind of at odds with each other, going back and forth. So that's very interesting to me. So let's go over the 4th house and the 10th house and kind of crack open the symbolism so that you can kind of understand it, Patty. The 4th house is the house of family. It's the house of home. It is our place of safety. It is our place of retreat. Yeah. But it can also indicate our deepest fears and our darkest secrets. It is the midnight position of the chart. Yeah. And you've put your Moon here. You know, there's a really strong emotional component to the family dynamic. But at the same time, we also have Pluto, the planet of the underworld, and Uranus, the planet of unpredictability and natural disaster, conjoining at 17 degrees, making a really terrible opposition to your Sun in Pisces. And what I think all of this means in your 4th house of family is that although you're very emotionally attached to your family, the emotional attachment to the family is, you know, you can't build a foundation on unstable ground, darling. You know, Pluto, although it can bring a depth of power halfway through the life after you mature past 50, those first 50 years of Pluto are very toxic and hidden from view, often kind of like having a tool that you don't know how to work with. And then pair that with Uranus, which is constantly associated with things like natural disasters, unpredictabilities, lightning strikes, just the unexpected. Yeah. Having those two energies together, it's kind of like there's an earthquake going on in your 4th house. And that's not stable bedrock for you to make a valid kind of personal growth stance on, right? Which is another reason why you had to be so adaptable. When you grew up, there was this idea of walking on eggshells. There was this idea of constantly needing to transform into whoever you needed to be in order to stay safe. And I think that that's a brilliant skill. And I think that it's a very colorful defense mechanism. It is still a defense mechanism. And it is still something that, although it is a part of your core personality, it can be dangerous and it can lead to conflict because you never know who you're going to be from one moment to the next. And when people enter your life and they start to try to nail you down and understand you, it becomes difficult for them to do so. Because if you don't know you, then how can somebody else know you, right? And that's all rooted kind of in the fear, in the feeling of, I don't know where the earthquake is going to strike. I don't know if my foot is going to land on a crack. I don't know if my literal safety will be threatened from one moment to another, right? And that's tricky. That's tricky, my darling. So we need to kind of understand that, embrace that, and also just make sure that you're really taking consideration to make sure that that early family upbringing and that the unpredictability of that situation is not bleeding into current fears or current hesitations. One of the other things about your chart is this Pisces Sun, this Saturn in Pisces, and this Mars in Pisces up in the 10th, all kind of in sign-based opposition to what's happening in the 4th. So the 10th house is the house of success. It's the house of being seen. It's the house of personal achievement, yeah, of legacy. And when we have stuff in the 4th house that's opposing or restricting or being in contrast to the 10th, it feels like this. It feels like what's happening behind the closed doors of the home, yeah, is stopping you or interfering with your ability to be successful, to be seen for who you are, and to claim your rightful place on the throne of life, right? You know, your sun in Pisces naturally makes you very sensitive, very intuitive, very compassionate, very spiritual. We do have boundary issues, but Saturn is here. You know, Mars is here as well. So I think that when it comes to you being seen and you achieving success, there's a large portion of that that's actually pretty good for you, especially as you mature and as excuse me, as you achieve that first Saturn return and as Mars starts to calm down a little bit. I think you being in the spotlight, you using your personality to your advantage, you kind of becoming a little bit more of a public figure is good for your chart. But there will always be this I'm not good enough voice, and it's not coming from anything that you're doing now. It's coming from kind of the skeletons in your closet back home. And that's something that you kind of need to understand about why you feel unfulfilled. It's not because of what you're doing currently. It's because of the voices in your head, the echoes of the past, and you constantly feeling the need to change no matter how good the situation is. Oh, well, I need to shift. I need to be doing something else. I need to activate my creative side. Honey, you don't need to activate your creative side. You don't need to do a whole 180, throw away everything that you've earned up until this point and start over. That's a fear response, darling. That's a fear response, right? And your friends will constantly tell you that. You know, one of the things I really, really enjoy about your chart is you having this Mercury in Aries in the 11th. You know, you're surrounding yourself with very determined individuals, also very focused individuals. So I would highly encourage you to join a networking group, you know, spend more time with friends, really vocalize your plights to your friends so that they can help refocus you, and kind of reality check you a little bit. Because there is this constant need to pivot, this constant need to be dissatisfied because you're not changing colors fast enough. But that feeling, that need to change color is rooted in the wrong motives, right? So we need to kind of work with that. We need to chew on that a little bit, and we need to understand that personal dynamic. If you start to understand that personal dynamic, then voila, you're great. But it's even going to bleed into your relationships if you let it, because Jupiter in the first house close to that ascendant is being wrapped up in that same cycle. We have that Jupiter ruling the 7th house of relationships. You know, you're looking for somebody in a relationship who can change with you, who can adapt with you. But again, if that adaptation, if that need to change is rooted in a place of fear and misunderstanding and defense, then that's not healthy for anybody. And it's certainly not healthy for you to ask a partner to do that, right? It's one thing to be interested and curious and dynamic and open to new experience. It's a one thing to constantly be running and changing shape to avoid predation, yeah, to avoid being caught by some invisible force. So, sorry, we're kind of digging into the teeth of this chart a little bit, Patty, but I think that this is definitely the medicine that you kind of need to hear for sure. And that's kind of what your North Node is saying. Your North Node in Taurus in the 12th. ruled by Venus in the ninth, you know, there's a strong drive towards emotional development this time around, and really the need to kind of spiritually cook and go on retreat, and find yourself in a more focused, spiritually structured environment. And as you continue to work on yourself and kind of peel back the layers and sort through the masks, I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting realizations that you come to through the digging around in your own personal experience. Excellent. Thank you, Patty. I very, very much appreciate your chart. Let's go ahead and move on to chart number 4. Chart number 4 is going to be Laura. Cheers, Laura. How are you? Oh my God, so funny. You guys, I don't even plan this, but we have a Gemini ascendant with Mercury and Aries in the 11th. It's and Pisces and Mars and Pisces in the 10th. So funny. So funny. It's very different otherwise though, but still, like, interesting how these charts just find a way to synchronize. Okay, let's see. So we've got this Gemini ascendant, which again gives a level of intellect to the chart. It gives a level of curiosity, spontaneity, adaptability, you know, all things that are creative and curious. And then to have Mercury, the ruler of the chart, in Aries in the 11th house of friendships, you know, there is a really strong need for good friendships, but especially in your case, Laura, you have this visceral need to develop competitive friendships. And there may be a little bit of an issue with that because we have Venus and Aries in the 11th house, which is not a great place for Venus to be. And that's also going to influence, oh, your Taurus sun. Damn, and your fifth house of children. Damn. Okay, so we've got some stickiness in the chart, first and foremost. When it comes to having Venus and Aries, you know, one of the energies that constantly comes up in the life with that placement is that love needs to be proven. Yeah? If you don't grow, if you're not constantly competing with yourself, if you're not being the best version of you that you can and constantly beating your own record, then your love isn't authentic. Yeah, then you're not proving how much you love me or want to spend time with me. And for you to have that in the 11th house of friendships, you know, it does bring this very competitive slant to your friendships, which is not necessarily super healthy. Not necessarily super healthy. It's a rather conditional form of love that you've decided to pack into your 11th house of friendships. So that's something to examine. Is, you know, you put so much value on the crowds that you surround yourself with, but the crowds that you surround yourself with have a tainted version of love. Yeah. And working on unconditional love might actually need to be a very strong theme in this chart, because having Venus in Aries ruling your sun in Taurus, which we'll get to in a second, in the 12th house, that's sticky. That's sticky. That's a very conditional form of love. So let's talk about this sun. You have a sun in Taurus, but it's in the 12th house of hidden enemies. It's in the 12th house of hospitalizations. It's in the 12th house of retreats, prisons, karmic healing. It's the house that people go to spiritually and physically cook. Whether or not they actually come out alive from that, different story. You know, physical or metaphysical death. Hey, Berserker. So when we look at the sun in Taurus in the 12th, ruled by this conditional Venus, right? There's a self-esteem issue, you know, and one of the ways to fight a self-esteem issue, and I use that word specifically, to fight a self-esteem issue, is to constantly grow and to constantly push yourself further than you've been before. Yeah? But growth does not necessarily equal healthy self-esteem, right? You can grow and acquire skills and acquire life lessons, but the growth can also be superficial. Yeah? The growth can also be detrimental. You know, it's very much like in gardening. If you let plants do what they do, right? Sometimes they grow the wrong way, or they grow in a way that is not necessarily for their best interest. And so we as gardeners often have to deadhead or train or trellis or bind these plants in order to help them grow so that they don't fall over, so that they, you know, produce the ripest fruit, so that they continue to grow and don't die or spend all of their energy in the wrong places, you know, so that we can partner with them more in depth. And I think that that's something that you kind of need to learn in your chart, Laura, is your self-esteem is naturally a little bit compromised because of this sun in the 12th. But then to pair that with a Venus who is very much about the conditional side of love and a more competitive friendship circle that's constantly poking and prodding you to go further, harder, deeper, faster, that's not always going to be healthy. It's not always going to be healthy, my darling. Okay. Where do we want to go next? Where do we want to go next? You say relationships, I say okay. Jupiter in Virgo in his fallen retrograde. That's so tricky. Parents will likely not approve of anybody that you bring home relationship-wise. There may be quite the conflict between who you choose as a spouse and who your family thinks you should choose as a spouse. Jupiter, planet of abundance and Lord, excuse me, Lord of luck, is in the restricted and rule-oriented sign of Virgo and is also retrograde in the 4th house of family. This means that the family dynamic is actually going to be much stricter. Although it can be abundant, it will also be much stricter than I think that you would feel comfortable with. And because that Jupiter is ruling the 7th house of relationships, we see that strictness of family life bleeding over into your relationships and potentially interfering in a very real way. And that can pose a problem. That can pose a problem. So I think healing the family dynamic and consolidating that with the relationship dynamic. And it could be up to you to choose, you know, if you want them to play matchmaker and them to kind of work on spousal choices for you that they would approve of so that you don't choose the wrong person or kind of tie your heart to a person that really screws up the family dynamic. Or maybe you don't invest that much in your family and you really could not care less. But remember, because the family dynamic is tied to the relationship dynamic in your natal chart, if you do not honor that family dynamic in some way, shape, or form, you are likely to repeat the same mistakes, i.e. marrying your mother, marrying your father, etc., etc. Right? So we need to honor that connection in some way, shape, or form in a healthy way, and working with that dynamic or possibly remediating Jupiter as well might be part of the equation for that. Also, interestingly enough, that same Jupiter is ruling your 10th house of success. So success will largely come from the family dynamic and that Jupiter placement. So if you're not doing as well career-wise, or if you'd really like to kind of get a bump in PR, lean on family connections and potentially, again, remediate that Jupiter to enhance your reputation. We do have an interesting pileup of the Moon in Capricorn, North Node Capricorn, Neptune and Uranus in Capricorn in the 8th. That's interesting. It's a good marker for investments. Good marker for investments. You would actually do very well in investments. But also interesting, I'm looking at the chart, and the more I'm looking at the chart, the more I see a couple factors for death, and working with hospice, working with estates, working with people who have passed away or who are on that edge, working with wills, working with legal stuff. You've got a great Saturn in Aquarius in the ninth. You're about to go through your Saturn return over the next year or two. Would not surprise me if there was some sort of legal aspect to your life that allowed you to interfere or helpfully interfere on behalf of the dead, or the dying, or those business contracts that relate to estates. You'd be very good at that, actually. You'd be very good at that. Because you have this really objective moon. Moon in Capricorn really, eliminates all the raw emotion, really allows you to take the practical stance, and your North Node is here. You're kind of working on those lessons this time around anyway. I really like that, actually. I like you in the legal field. I like you working with those who have chronic medical conditions, who are kind of bound by their fate, and you kind of working with the last options that they have. I like that. I like that a lot, actually. Yeah, I think that's pretty much the crux of the chart. Awesome. Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you donating your chart to the live streams. We've got one more chart. Oh, cool, Laura. I'm glad that you were able to tune in for that. Hope that you enjoyed it. Let's go ahead and look at our last chart, which is going to be Helen. My dear, my darling. Hope that you're faring well over in the UK. Let's take a peek at this chart, shall we? Oh, a lovely Libra moon and an ascendant. Oh, but a complicated Mars. Okay. Sun in Leo can join North Node Leo. Ooh, that's a very interesting placement, my dear. The focus of this chart. The focus of this chart. Huh. So fascinating. So fascinating. The deliberateness of this chart, I very much appreciate. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right, let's take a peek. So we have this kind of stellium in Libra in the first house that we need to talk about first. The moon in Libra, the ascendant in Libra, Pluto in Libra, and Mars in Libra. Now, when we look at having so much in Libra, we need to over-identify with this archetype. And I know that you've been told that you're a Leo your whole life, and we'll get to the Leo part. But because you have both ascendant and the moon in Libra, plus a personal planet Mars and a kind of generational planet Pluto, there is a lot that we need to understand about Libra in your chart. First and foremost, the good stuff, and I would highly suggest, I just did a Signs 101 series on YouTube. I would highly suggest you look at the Libra video to understand a little bit more about Libra, but we'll kind of summarize it. Libra is the sign of the peacekeeper. It's a sign that really does focus on the idea of justice. It's a sign that prefers things to be balanced, hence its name, the scales, but it is often too nice for its own good. And because it's always playing devil's advocate, it also has a harder time making decisions. Yeah, indecision is the plague of all Libras everywhere. And because they are so sweet, a lot of people let them off the hook for it. But it can often plague them internally that they can't make a decision to save their life. And that's a tricky component, especially with Mars and Libra here. So Mars is normally the planet that we look to for decision, for making action, for creating initiative, right? But to put Mars in his fall in the scales of Libra, it fractures that decision-making skill even more. And it really makes your next steps super conditional on context and never really your own. And I think that's kind of where you get a lot of that bleeding heart dynamic in your chart, because we're about to talk about your chart ruler, Venus, in Cancer, which is another big part of this. But that indecision and that need for context is so important in your chart because really you don't have the markers to be that initiator, to be that leader, to be that person who says, yep, this is what we're doing, and makes that call. Yeah, it's just not necessarily there. Instead, what you really lean on more than anything else is this Venus placement. So the ruler of your chart, because Libra is on the ascendant, is this Venus in Cancer, as well as MC in Cancer in the 10th. Now, with this Venus, Venus in Cancer I really enjoy as kind of like the Octomom archetype. It's kind of Venus as goddess of love and affection in the sign of the mother. And I see this as kind of the octopus. It's all about taking care of. It's always about wrapping its tentacles around things, to feel, to sense, to intuitively navigate, but always from a place of caring, always from a place of concern for others, for empathy, right? And that being the ruler of your chart in the 10th house of success, the big thing about your life is that you live to please others. It's just there. There is no escaping it. Unless you are being of service, unless you are acting on behalf of the wellness of others, you will not make a move. Although your sun is in Leo, I would argue that you do not have a selfish bone in your body. And that's tricky, because in life we need a little bit of selfishness. We need to be able to stand up for ourselves. We need to be able to claim our rights as people. We need to be able to say, hey, I want this for dinner. Or, hey, I need to go to the hospital. God forbid, cancel that. Or, hey, I need this form of self-care. Yeah? Unfortunately, you're so wrapped up in the idea of taking care of others, which in and of itself can be a noble pursuit, my darling. And in fact, we'll get to your career placements in a second, which makes it really, really easy and wonderful for you to be so caring and nurturing. However, when it comes to you taking care of you, you're always going to draw the short straw when it comes to what you want and what you need. Yeah? So we often need to surround you in your life with people and places and things that are going to be a little bit more perceptive, that are going to be a little bit more concerned about what you need. And those things and those people really being your advocates, as opposed to you constantly passing the buck to them and saying, well, what do you want? Yeah. And what they kind of need to understand, which can be infinitely frustrating for them, is they think that you're just doing that because you're trying to be lazy, or you're not strong enough to make a decision for yourself, or, all of these harsher kind of judgments. But really what they need to understand is that it's coming from a place of compassion and caring. It is a defense mechanism. It is not necessarily healthy, but it is always for the highest good and for their highest good, that you're kind of acting with others' needs in mind. Let's see, North Node in Leo in the 11th, Mercury in Leo, Sun in Leo. There's a lot of activity here in the 11th house of friendships and social groups and tribes, so much so that I would really encourage you, especially from a business perspective, if business is ever slow, if you really want to kind of make way or make head with what you're doing career-wise or just in your life in general, I would switch up your social groups. I would do a lot of networking. I would involve myself in the community, because these are the places where you're going to find a lot of your radiance, a lot of your self-confidence. And again, if you're acting on behalf of the community or acting on behalf of a larger philanthropic organization as a whole, then you can make decisions all day long. Then you can act, because the decision is not yours. You are acting as a representative or on behalf of the community, right? That's how we get around that little choice mechanism, right? Because you're not doing it for you. You're doing it for the greater good, yeah? So you sitting on boards of associations will actually restore a lot of your confidence, because you're putting your caregiving nature to work. And you're allowing yourself to be the advocate, but also by being the advocate for others, you're actually able to make the decisions, and surround yourself with the people who would equally support you in those decision-making processes. Yeah, so the more you can surround yourself with social groups and public and kind of community-based organizations, the better your chart will thrive. We do have a lot of interest and focus on the health and wellness fields. When we look at the 6th house of work with Pisces on the cusp, we do have the ruler of that house as being Jupiter in Virgo in the 12th, as well as Saturn in Virgo in the 12th. Now, this isn't necessarily a super prosperous business type aspect. In fact, you'll make a lot of money from your personality and from your community involvement, not necessarily from your business-related day-to-day efforts. Your monetary aspect in your chart is too connected to who you are as a person, and not necessarily to the job that you do. People come to you and they will pay you for who you are, not necessarily for what service you provide. You could do anything. You could be a janitor. You could be a grocer. You could be a painter or an artist. They're going to support you. Yeah, and your community connections are why that's so important. But when it comes to you kind of navigating in the health and wellness fields, it is such an important part of your chart. And in fact, teaching in those areas is also a very big part of your chart, because that same Jupiter that's ruling your 6th house of work is also ruling your 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. And you stepping into a teacher role can actually fuel your own self-growth and own self-development. So if there was kind of like a hack that I would give you as kind of like a little tidbit in your chart, if you feel like you need to grow, if you feel like you need to develop, if you feel like you're lagging behind in the karma department, or there's something in your life that you need to change but you're not really sure what it is, write a class. Yeah, write a class. Because what will happen is it will force your brain to develop the solutions and the answers to problems that you're thinking about. And it will break a lot of the patterns that are old, because you'll be going through those filing cabinets of the mind and the heart. And you'll start to realize, oh, this is old news. We don't need this. Instead, it should look like this. And you creating a class where you're actually teaching other people based on the lessons and the experiences that you have, that will start to rewrite your own patterns and actually help you to break through and help you to grow on multiple levels while you serve, while you leverage your community. And that's a really interesting kind of aspect of your chart, is if you leverage your ability to teach, even if you never teach a day in your life, but you start to activate that 3rd house of writing, teaching, and communication, it will trigger not just an advancement in your work and your career, but also an advancement in your 12th house of kind of self-development. And that being a really important space for you to reclaim those bits of yourself that are also holding you back. But it all comes down to doing stuff for others instead of yourself. You know, when you try to grow for you, you feel selfish. But when you start to activate that moon and that ascendant in Libra, that Venus in Cancer in the 10th, and all of those social placements in the 11th house of community and tribes and networking and friendships, like that's when you start to leverage your chart. That's when you start to do some pretty cool stuff. Not when you try to act of your own accord or try to develop your own interests. Instead, it has to be connected to other people, and the best way to help other people grow is through teaching. It just so happens that there's a selfish ulterior motive in there as well, because along the road of teaching, you start to grow, and I speak from personal experience when I say that. Okay, my darling. Kisses from Florida. Hope that you have a fantastic rest of your week. You're very welcome, Laura. Thank you so much for joining. And that is pretty much it for our live stream. We're almost at about an hour, so we did pretty good today, time-wise. Thank you, everybody, for joining me for this round of the Astro-Babble. We do this every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, if you would like to donate your chart to the live stream, the list is rather long, so please be patient. Please be patient. I will message you when your chart is featured. So you will know when you're up on the list, but private message me your birth date, birthplace, exact birth time, and I will add you to that list. Likewise, I am a professional astrologer, so if you would like to work one-on-one, if you would like to unpack your chart, talk about what the stars have in store or say about your personality in your life, or if you'd like to learn astrology, you can always go to my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com, click the consultations page to submit a consultation request. You'll also see my price list on there, as well as all the online classes that I have, including the most recent recording that I did last night on planetary altars. So lots of fun stuff there, but I will let you get back to the rest of your week. Thank you for joining me, and as always, until next time, may the stars be ever in your favor.